expand this study. We're going to do stuff on like grandparents, their responsibilities, and might as well hit everybody, make everybody uncomfortable. Last week we'd finished up talking about Eli's dereliction of duty on the part of his family. And I tell you what was interesting to me is that the Lord judged his house based upon how he raised his kids. Like I told you, Eli himself loved the Lord, loved the Word of God. It killed him when he found out, not that his kids died in battle, but that the Ark of God was taken. I mean, was he so spiritually minded he was no earthly good? Well, in some ways, yeah. One thing about Scripture is that God does not absolve you from what you're responsible for. You may shirk that duty, but it'll come back and get you. And whatever duty you shirk, you can bet somewhere along the line, the Lord's going to bring that thing back around saying, you should have took care of this. And you'll regret it. The verse 3, well, let me give you the reference, I think, here. We're 1 Samuel. No, that's not it. Give me just a second here. 1 Samuel 3, 11 to 18 is the text. But verse 3 says, because his sons made themselves vile and he restrained them not. And we looked at corporal punishment in the Scriptures, which it absolutely positively teaches. And I made the comment that because they're children, it's superficial pain. It's not meant to be, take the flesh off their back or, break a limb. You see, we do that to criminals. That's what we set aside for criminals. And of course, now in America we don't really do that, but in other countries they do. Chop your head off, chop a hand off. It should never be abuse or harming a child physically, because it's just superficial pain, because that's all they need to teach them. Okay. And then that kind of puts the onus on you, because now we find out if you have control. Because if you can't control how you're going to discipline, don't expect that kid to control himself later on. He knows when you're out of control, and you know when you're out of control. The thing is, you're trying to teach him control by being out of control. That don't work, But the few things I mentioned there last week is that he made no demands of his children, and that is, don't ask for obedience, demand it from children. That's the one time in their life when you can demand something of them, and they can't just turn around and walk away from you. So you demand obedience and set boundaries. Let them learn what boundaries are. That helps them to exercise self-control. They don't even have to know why it's a boundary. Not everything has to be explained. Has God explained everything to you? He tells you to do things, you have no idea why he instructs you to do it, but you just do it. You know what he told those priests to do? He said, I want you to wash with running water. I don't want a pan where you go like this. I want you to wash in running water. Well, why should we do that, Lord? That seems like a waste of water. Because they had never seen a microorganism, never even thought about a microorganism, but there are microorganisms. And the only way to get those hands clean is to wash in running water, to wash it off of you, away from you, not... But that's just being an obedient to God and just following the instruction because God knows. There's other things in there. I mean, there are so many different things in there in the Scriptures that have even a scientific reason why God asked him to do it. It's like when he told him to circumcise on the 8th day. The 8th day of a child's life, the potassium or the vitamin K that's in their body is at the greatest concentration that it will ever be their entire life. And he said, well, don't they circumcise like one day or on the day of their birth? Yeah, they have to give them a shot of vitamin K. But God said do it the 8th day. Why? Because he knew, and he had made that body to where that vitamin K level was going to be through the roof so that body would clot. Nobody knew that. You just believed God and did it on the 8th day. And everything worked out fine when you follow God's instruction. So set boundaries for your children. Set boundaries. Say, you're not to go here, you're not to do this, you're not to open this door. And if they do it, then you discipline them, you correct them. They learn that there's boundaries. They had no limits. Had no limits set on them. Eli's threshold for unleashing his kids on others was just through the roof. You know, have you ever seen those parents where you walk into this a home or someplace, you know, and these kids are literally hanging off the lights from the ceiling, you know. They say the chandeliers, you know. And there's just mayhem and now I know kids get loud. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about kids playing, having a good time. I am talking about literally they're going crazy. And you're trying to have a conversation, and I'm telling you, it makes me nervous. You'll see me, I'm just like, I'm looking around, you know, and it's hard for me to pay attention to what's being said to me because I'm watching these children just literally, you know, doing things that are not just not safe. It's crazy. And the parents are oblivious. Now I know parents get oblivious to their children. Daddy, 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 daddy. You know, and you're like, talk to the kid, will you? But I probably did that myself. I know my wife did it, and I did it, and everybody else has done it. But that's just part of being a parent. But when they just go mad, no limits, and there seems to be no limit in the parents of how long they're going to allow it to take place. The other thing, they created no structure. Children need a highly structured existence with responsibilities. All that's good. I don't think you're going to overtax them. Now, don't make it inhuman. Don't make it so structured that there's no free thought, liberty. I mean, you want liberty. They want liberty. It's just you want your children to be creative. You know, you can beat down a child so bad they'll never be creative, and that's not what you want. And you do want a child that's got a little spirit in them. I mean, you can break them down like a pack animal, and they'll do exactly what you say most of your life until they get old enough to where they tell you what to do. But you want a little spirit in them because that's what makes great men and women. That's what makes great preachers, great teachers, great evangelists and missionaries. They got some spirit about them. Okay. And I realize that you say, well, you're giving us a pretty narrow. Yeah, it's kind of narrow. But if you follow the instructions, and do your best at it, you're not going to be perfect. And you're not going to raise perfect kids. That's for sure. But you're going to do 100 times better than the lost out there that think they've got a handle on it when they're denying what this book has to say about it. He established no ultimatums, that is, do it or else. And the other thing is, he didn't apply what I call the Board of Education to their seat of learning. He spared the rod. And it says, the verse first we looked at was Proverbs 13:24, he that spareth the rod hateth his own son. Well, they're actually telling you they're doing it because they love them. They're not going to paddle them. They're not going to correct them because they love them. But my Bible says you hate them. And I think it's because you are destroying that child for who he is going to be. If you don't hate him now, you'll hate him later. It says, he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. And we looked at that verse, that word betimes means early. Don't wait till they're 5. Betimes is before years. That means before 2. I guarantee you'll want to get them before 2. They'll be on your last nerve at 2. Proverbs 22:15 we looked at, foolishness is bound the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. That rod of correction will release that foolishness. It'll drive it away. And having been a parent, see my grandchildren, it's a process. It's not something that happens. You think one spanking, that'll do it. Are you kidding me? You're probably looking at hundreds of spankings over, but I can tell you this, you'll probably stop spanking your child much earlier than if you don't do it often enough. Because they will learn that they will stop what they're doing on a verbal correction. Because that was the next verse. Actually, the one beyond that, Proverbs 29:15, the rod and reproof give wisdom. In other words, it's not just the rod of correction, but it's reproof. You reprove them with your voice, with your, people say, well, I don't like to scream. Well, I do. I was a screamer. Hey, get over here. Stop that. Get out of the road. But a rod and reproof give wisdom. So usually, I think after a certain time, you'll find out that spankings will trail off. I'm talking about when they start nearing teenage years and things like that, just because they have learned and they control themselves. I mean, you shouldn't have to beat them till they're 18. You know what I mean? It shouldn't work that way. You should see the progress. Now, sometimes it's so slow, you don't notice it, but you are making progress. He says, withhold not correction from the child, and that's exactly what Eli did. He withheld correction from the child. If thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. That tells me that the reason God has this thing in here, it has something to do with them being obedient to him. If they're not obedient to you, you cannot expect that child to be obedient to God. It just won't work. Teach them to be obedient to their parents. And then, like I said, when God comes knocking on their heart, they're open. Why? They're used to obeying authority. Okay. And I did mention Job 9, where Job talks about the Lord taking a rod to him. So let him take his rod away from me and let not his fear terrify me. And it seemed like with each step of authority, that rod of reproof gets more severe. And that's true with authority in our lives, I mean, as children, our parents, that was an authority, But then there's the government that can execute you. Romans chapter 13. And then beyond that is God, the highest authority, and he'll throw you in a lake of fire. So it makes sense to me that Daddy, the father, is the heavy in the family when it comes to discipline. Not abusive. I never mean that. But the heavy. In other words, when he spanks harder than mommy. And when it's almost like it's getting thrown up to a higher court, when mom says, we got a problem you need to deal with. And then Daddy steps in. He may not have whipped him in 6 months, but boy, when he's called upon, when it's up to him, well, he should let them know. They should dread it. It should be terrifying to them. Not terrified of you as far as a father, have fear of you, but terrified of those whippings. Okay? And that's not hard to do. Children understand a hard spanking. I was a hard spanker. Okay? I found that the least... So I didn't want to have to worry about hurting them. So we have these 1/8 inch, 1.5 to 2 inch wide, I don't know what you want to call it, just like it's not a round paddle, but it's just kind of like a ruler, but that wasn't really even as thick as some rulers. I mean, it was just... And what it did was, as it contacted, it caused pain. Because I tried it on myself. I whipped myself just to see how it would feel. It worked. And you get too big of a paddle, you've spread out that area, and you don't get the result. A switch, and I'm not against a rod, but a switch leaves welts and stripes. And that can get you thrown in jail, even though it should never get you thrown in jail. But so rather than have to deal with that, I came up with that one, and it inflicted plenty of superficial pain that got the correction across to the child without. And so anyway, everybody has their own little thing they use, spatula, I don't know. But it's something that it's not too thin that it's going to cause a welt, but it's not too wide that it's not going to cause any pain either. And, I don't know how you can't, if your child's still wearing diapers at 1.5, I don't know how you're gonna discipline a child through a diaper. I don't know if it's even possible, but they pretty much just kind of laugh at you. Back of the leg, yeah. Let's look at some warnings about doing it wrong, though. There's 2 times in the Bible. Turn to Ephesians 6:4 and Colossians 3:21. You can do it wrong. And he addresses fathers. And I think this is typically a man thing. He says there in Ephesians 6:4, we'll read both of them, then I'll comment on it. It says, and ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And then in Colossians 3:21, he says, fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. And I got thinking, I said, what would it be about a father that God would be addressing twice? Didn't say, and mother, but he just says, he just deals with the fathers. And I think that's because boys grow up to be men, and when boys are boys, they ridicule and they belittle, and that's just part of their makeup. And, kick the kid in the hind end and tell him to, act like a man. But you do it publicly in front of somebody, and the Bible says you provoke them to wrath. You provoke them to anger. You may not know it now. When you humiliate a child in front of a group of people. Now, if what they have done is public, then you can publicly bring them in for apologies or whatever. But when you're disciplining, be careful how you do it. Be careful how you speak to your child. What you're thinking is not wounding to you, is wounding them in a way that it makes them angry. And you're not supposed to do that. I wouldn't discipline out in public. Like I said, if something was done publicly, that might be a different matter, but I wouldn't discipline out in public at all. What we did was, whenever our children were out and they misbehaved, we just looked at them and said, when you get home, you get a spanking. And I've told you, we wake them up. We don't care if they're sound asleep. We wake them up. And after we did that for a little while, guess what? They knew that when we said, look, you better straighten up or you're going to get a spanking. They knew we weren't kidding. And they straightened up. But boy, if they know that they got you over a barrel, that you're not going to do something publicly, you're not going to whip them there in the restaurant or take them in the bathroom. Either way, we had a friend of ours that taken her daughter in and was spanking her, and inside the stall was spanking her, and another woman banging on the door. You stop that! You quit hitting that child! Well, you don't want that kind of thing happening either. I mean, she probably raised nothing but heathen, the woman that's banging at the door, but she's telling you not to discipline, Probably both of hers are in prison. Anyway, so there's just times when you don't, and the belittling and the humiliating. Do you like it? When somebody tries to belittle or humiliate you? Especially when you're a kid. I mean, listen, children take everything a little bit more serious than we do as adults. They haven't learned to kind of let that just roll off of them. Or they haven't learned, even when you're being playful, you got to be worried about it. Okay? Now, you can say, now be tough. You could appeal to their gender. Okay? Be a boy. Okay? And you have to watch that. But don't humiliate them and don't belittle them, especially when you're correcting them. That way you don't have to worry about them getting angry later. Turn to Matthew 23:13. Here's something else. And the Lord Jesus picked this out. He saw this was going on. He says, "But woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in." That's not the verse I wanted, actually. Let me see if I can find it here. Let me see if it's on down through here. Maybe it's 23. Yep. Sorry about that. 23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye pay tithe of mint, anise, and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. That's not the verse either. That's not the verse. I want the one where it says, for they tell you, they say and do not. Where is that one? Let me see here. No, it's verse 3. Good grief. Okay. So it wasn't 23:13, it wasn't 23:23, it was 23:3. All therefore, whatsoever they bid you observe. Notice that it doesn't absolve you from obeying those over you. But he says about them, that observe and do, but do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. You see that? Now, I'm not going to say that's not true in some cases because you're an adult. There are some things you do that you don't allow your child to do. But don't be guilty of the very transgression that you're correcting them for. Because you know what? Usually they're just kind of mimicking what you're doing. I mean, that's what they say about, a boy and his father, man. You are the pattern to them of a man. So you've got to be careful when you're around them. You've got to, if I would say this, I would say just learn to, when you do something off color or wrong, okay, smash your hand with a hammer and some blue words come out of your mouth, apologize and say that was wrong of me. I shouldn't have done that. And I don't ever want you to learn how to talk like that. That kind of thing. That goes a long way with a kid if you apologize to them. Children are very merciful. They forgive their parents all the time. So, and you might, like I said, you might also want to learn occasionally to show mercy. I mean, that's what they're going to be asking the Lord to do, right? And so you can learn to show it too. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 2. And we're going to read some verses down through here. This still has to do with Eli's children and I want to kind of zoom in on some things that they were doing wrong. It says, now the sons of Eli, verse 12, 1 Samuel 2:12. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. So he's raised some unsaved kids, that didn't get saved. And the priest custom with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came while the flesh was in seething with a flesh hook of 3 teeth. Here's where you get the devil and his pitchfork. Remember, these are sons of Belial. Okay? Of 3 teeth in his hand, and he struck it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. And all that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. Also, before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. Now, this all has to deal with how God wanted this sacrifice performed. And one of the things was the fat belonged to the Lord. They wanted the fat burned on the altar. The flesh, well, the priest had every right to come and partake of the flesh because he was partaking of the altar. they were supplying his needs. So they had this flesh hook, pitchfork, and they would jab it into that flesh, and whatever they brought up, that's what they were welcome to eat, take home to their family or whatever. Hophni and Phinehas don't like the way it was being done. Okay, maybe it wasn't being grilled to their specifications. I don't know. But the word sodden almost means like it's limp, or it's, saturated or something like that. And however they were doing it, the priest saying, well, we want raw flesh. Well, they said, well, at least burn the fat. They wouldn't even do that. And he says there, if any man said unto him, let them not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desireth, then he would answer him, nay, but thou shalt give it me now, and if not, I'll take it by force. Does that sound like a spoiled brat to you? I mean, I realize it's somebody they're sending to do this, but it's like, they're sending somebody that's like-minded like they are. No, just take it by force. Oh, that's what a child does. Give you that. Okay? It says, wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord. Why? It's causing others to transgress because they're making the sacrifice just unbearable. It says, for men abhorred the offering of the Lord. You know that men, women, families have despised church because of preachers' kids. Literally despised. There was a church I was in. You wouldn't know it. You wouldn't even know the preacher. But we visited there, and we were just kind of looking around. We had another family with us, and we went into this church, and we sat down, and we were like the only ones there. I think there might have been 2 elderly sitting over to the left. And we're talking a church as big as this one. And there was nobody there. If we hadn't been there, there'd have been 2 people there. And we stayed there for just a couple weeks, and that preacher kind of showed his hand. And everybody left that church because of his kid. He had a dope head for a kid that was abusing people in the church, probably asking for money or stealing stuff, whatever he's doing, but it was all about his kid. This is exactly what happened here. Men abhorred the offering of the Lord. Now, Eli was very old. You know what that means? It's too late. It's too late to do anything about it. Was very old and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how they lay with the woman that assembled at the door of the tabernacle. Now, this is not just messing with the sacrifices. Now he's messing with the women. As far as I know, Hophni and Phinehas are married. We know that they're married at the end. And said unto them, why do ye such things? Because they're uncontrolled, uncorrected, undisciplined sinners. Because that's the only difference. We're all sinners. We all have the capability of doing everything that they're doing. It's just, did you have a good mom and dad that busted you and told you you're not going to do that? And you have some self-control. He says, for I hear of the evil dealings by all this people. Nay, my sons, it is no good report that I hear. Ye make the Lord's people to transgress. When you're the one responsible for causing people to despise church and despise coming to church, despising God's people, that sin's going to be on you. Now, I guess they're responsible for how they. I don't know that. I know I've seen a lot of kids just they get sick of church or whatever it is they get sick of. I've heard they get sick of fundamentalism. I heard they get sick of anybody that's a Baptist preacher that preaches against sin or anything like that. And I forgot the thought of what I was going to say. Had something to do with. Well, I'll think about it here in a minute. Eli and Samuel's children, the result of what they did, what these children were doing, the result of what they did, caused the Israelites to demand a king. That was a rejection of God the Father in the Old Testament. He said, they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me for being their king. And this precipitated that. This was some of the cause for that. Give us a king. It's obvious we can't have these priests ruling over us that abuse us and misuse us. So that's part of the result when it says, ye make the Lord's people to transgress. Shortly thereafter, it's not too long after, when Samuel's the priest, they said, we give us a king. Why? Because not even Samuel's kids were doing what they should have been doing. I know I was thinking of Dave Hiles, Jack Hiles' boy. And I told you that Jack Hiles pretty much had told him that he didn't have time to raise him, pretty much, spend time with him. Dave Hiles was nearly the downfall of one of the largest churches in America, if it wasn't the largest. I think they ran 20-some thousand in Sunday school. We're talking huge church. And nearly the downfall of that church because of his boy. See, what was his boy doing? Well, he couldn't control himself and stepped out on his marriage on how many times? That just kept going on. See, the very thing you think, well, I got to do this for God, me and God. Well, you better worry about the rest of the family too. It's funny when a pastor gets chosen for, or gets voted on, that they're supposed to look at the wife because he has to have his family in subjection with all gravity. He's responsible that, if he can't run his family, how's he going to run the church? So you look at them too. Eli didn't see it that way, but God did. Now, here's what was interesting to me, is the fact that when this comes out, what they're doing, it manifested itself in two things: food and fornication. Food and fornication. Deuteronomy 21:20 says this, and they shall say unto the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. You say, where does it begin? It begins at the table. Do you know the first sin in the Bible is someone was putting something in their mouth that they weren't supposed to? Isn't that what you're always saying to children? Don't put that in your mouth. They're putting coins, dirt, rocks. Don't put that in your mouth. He said to Adam and Eve, don't put that in your mouth. And Eve did. Do you know at the end, you know what corrects it? God says, put this in your mouth. And takes him to the tree of the knowledge of good. Do you realize it begins with eating, it ends with eating? Eating must be important. It was surprising to me how angels love to eat. Anytime there's a meal, an angel's sitting down. Even Lot's wife, man. He probably knows she ain't going to make it. Well, she can cook, though. And they have one last meal before she turns around and gets turned into a pillar of salt. All right? But, anytime there's a meal, they're sitting down. And the Lord did the same. He rises from the dead. He doesn't need to eat. He says, have you any meat? They give him a piece of fish and some honeycomb. I think when God invented eating, he says, this is something right here. This is a blessing. Can you say there's nothing better than a good meal? A meal it's unbelievable how pleasurable a good meal is. And I think that's pleasurable to God. And of course, the devil attacked that the very first thing he went after. It was something to eat. So I believe that a good portion of child rearing happens at the kitchen table. I think it happens at the kitchen table. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, be not deceived, evil communications corrupt good manners. You know what you teach a child at the table? Manners. Yeah, it won't kill you. You can usually tell when someone wasn't raised with manners. Now, I'm not faulting you if you weren't raised with them, My wife's all the time. I chomp too loud. I chew. I don't swallow, or no, all I do is swallow. I don't chew. That's what I mean, I'm enjoying my food. Even if I am inhaling it, I'm enjoying it. But we did have some manners. We would always sit at the table, and that's something you don't want to get around when you have children. Now, when the children are gone, do what you want. But when you got children in the home, you sit them at a table, and you make them have manners. You teach them manners, because it seems like this kind of graduates. If you just say, well, grab it and growl, that kind of thing, and they can, man, if I did that, I mean, there was bedlam at my house. And my brother was always testing that. I would look at him like, why? Because my dad would get so furious. I mean, it would literally be a beating at the table. I mean, it was like shaking the table and trying to eat. Well, everything's going. He's trying to swinging at him, and my dad wasn't saved. But anyway, let me get the verse here. Psalm 128:3. The manners they learned at the table, I think, depend on what kind of manners they're going to have when they grow up. And I found this verse, Psalm 128:3, and it says, Thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by the sides of thine house, thy children like olive plants round about thy table. Now it's interesting though, we know that it's the vine tree that was in was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's a vine tree, like grapes, not an apple, okay? But the tree of life is in Romans chapter 11, and it mentions an olive tree, an olive branch, okay? And it says, thy children like olive plants. In other words, they have the tree of life. They're saved. It says, round about thy table. Round about thy table. You have them around you. I just believe there's a lot taught at the table. They become fruitful, just as it says, your wife is a fruitful vine. Children, olive plants. So, more happens there, and like I said, it begins with eating. These things that become uncontrolled deal a lot with food, gluttony, okay, and not controlling your body, fornication, and we're going to find out here it also has to do with not respecting the female or not respecting the women, and you have got to teach your boys that. 1 Corinthians 5:1 says, it is reported commonly that there is fornication among you, and such fornication as is not so much as named among the Gentiles that one should have his father's wife. Now, this is probably not this was not the boy's mother, but it was his stepmother. Doesn't matter, it's still incest. But it shows a very unnatural, unhealthy type of thinking on his part. He wasn't taught to respect, and that's the thing with your boys. Never allow them to disrespect their mother. Ever. And if they do, they pay. Okay? Make them always respect their privacy, open the door for them, make them respect women. Because it seems like we've raised this generation. You might have raised him to be a man. I mean, he's a man. Yeah, but what kind of man is he? Is he a brute? Is he brutish? Have you raised a rapist? A whore hopper? What have you raised? Because you told him about your conquest and how badly you were raised. So I would think that would be something you would want to make sure, and that is, you learn to tell them, don't touch. Bible says it is good for a man not to touch a woman. I try to make sure when somebody comes in, and then sometimes it's you stick your hand out there. I stick my hand out to the man and shake his hand, and I never extend it to the woman unless she extends her hand. Okay? There's no reason for me to touch his wife or shake her hand if she doesn't want me to. This thing about putting your hand on their shoulder, that's somebody else. I mean, it'd be different. Loretta, she's like, a lot of them like moms. I'm not saying, but I'm saying you put your hand on some other man's wife's, or man's wife? Yeah, man's wife's shoulder. Why? Well, I'm just kind of touchy-feely. Yeah, and the Bible says don't touch them. Get your hands off of them. It's not that, even if there's nothing in your mind about it, there might be something in their mind about it. They may not want you to touch them. Okay? So, a lot of it's just common respect. It's honoring that woman as the weaker vessel, and make your children honor her. And you won't have any problems out of them later on. But boy, Eli had a whole bunch of problems, didn't he? Can't imagine what he's doing, man. I mean, you might as well say they're having sex in the church. That's really what's happening. All right. Deuteronomy chapter 11. And by the way, that fella in 1 Corinthians 5, they were bragging about what was going on. His conquest. The notch on his belt. Wow. It nearly got him killed. He was this close to dying. And he was just smart enough to realize that God's going to kill me. And he got right. And then they restored him to fellowship. But he was this close. This close to getting killed. Deuteronomy chapter 11, look at verse 18 to 21, and I need to stop. Don't even bother to turn there. We got to stop. Okay. Is there any questions what I covered? I'm kind of taking my time, even going over some stuff that I did last week, but is there any questions about what we've talked about today? Yep.
You put your elbows on the table when you
You've been talking to my wife.